Welcome to The Forest Garden, your guide to transforming your organic gardening practice into an edible and holistic forest garden landscape. Happy New Year, everyone! On today's episode of The Forest Garden, we're kicking off Season 2 with an interview with Matt Lebon, owner of Custom Foodscaping based in St. Louis, Missouri, and director of the Foodscaper, an educational community that is committed to leading the conversation in the ecological edible landscaping industry. If you are based in an urban or semi-urban location and interested in transforming your lawn into a nutritious, ecologically healthy, and aesthetically pleasing landscape, then stay tuned for today's episode.
So Matt, thanks for joining us. A good place to start because, I've reviewed some of the work that you've done briefly, but I'm really anxious to learn more about what you do. So could you maybe just talk a little bit about your path to doing the work that you're doing now?
Yeah. It's been a long path as it is, I'm sure, with all of us here. But my path got started kind of out of college, searching for what was going to be meaningful in my life. And I had really, graduated and I had no idea still what I wanted to do. I ended up in the Peace Corps and was doing training in what was called the Rural Economic Development sector in Paraguay as a Paraguay Peace Corps volunteer. And my trainer he was like the ag trainer, and he hadn't really done much training in this sector. And so he ended up kind of taking us on all these agricultural field trips. And one of them took us to this kind of small homestead. At the time I didn't even know what a homestead was, but it was this small Paraguayan farm that had a few pigs, had all these fruit trees, and I remember tons of strawberries, and they were producing all their own biogas with hogs and just doing a lot of vermicomposting and all these things that kind of just blew my mind. They called it permaculture. And so I was like totally smitten, fell all the way in love, and kind of just been on that, path as so many folks I've met with a similar trajectory. You kind of just realized that this was what I was interested in. And I've kind of just been on that path for quite a while now. And it kind of eventually took me to, working on farms and educational farm schools. And it was kind of feeling like, all right, so what's my long-term play here? The educational farm wasn't really the way I wanted to kind of like spend my career. And I started to hear about different like edible landscaping companies and foodscaping companies around the country, ironically, through some different podcasts. And that just got me super jazzed to kind of take that route and try my hand at entrepreneurship. So like 5 years ago, started a company called Custom Foodscaping. And now we do design, install, and maintenance of food producing landscapes, we say.
You're originally from St. Louis, is that right?
Yeah.
And when you decided to start your business, did you have other ideas of where you wanted to start, or did you have this love of the city and you just really wanted to, stay local?
No, definitely wanted to stay local. So many times, like I had lived in Brooklyn before moving back to St. Louis. And I think if you live in a place like Brooklyn or so many other kind of big cities where there's so many ideas and there's so much energy going around, you realize like entrepreneurship is really well suited to more of a mid-sized city like St. Louis, because not all the great ideas are taken up. There's not nearly as much competition. And there's still plenty of people, a huge marketplace, millions of people in my case, who are potentially living in the metropolitan area. So it was well suited. And also at the time I was coming off of a job managing this organic farm school. And so I kind of had a lot of connections in the St. Louis area anyway. So it just kind of made sense for me to continue with St. Louis.
I think what you're doing is really great. And one of the things I think is kind of interesting about doing foodscaping in a city is I feel like it's a different dynamic than permaculture, how we normally think of permaculture in like either rural settings or more suburban rural settings. I feel like in the urban environment, it's a different dynamic in terms of the clientele, the people who you're working with, what they want, what they're looking for, and then availability of materials and finding plants and sourcing things. Could you speak a little bit about the difference of urban permaculture and how you think about it separately, maybe if at all, from maybe the more like, the stereotypical thought of permaculture, which is a bit more rural and, open country?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I guess my context has been so urban, and I've often thought of permaculture as, a very urban thing potentially. So it's interesting to point that out. I generally don't even think about what we do as permaculture, or, really, I don't really ever use the word permaculture in our work. A lot of times, we're just really helping people grow food and think about ecological landscaping is the way that we talk about it. We help them manage water. We help them plant native plants to, be part of a diverse and robust, ecology. And we help them in that design process. For me, is very much influenced by a lot of the permaculture books and trainings that I did. But for us, it's really about how do we organize, a set of elements in a small space. Like usually that means we're helping people start with, siting a raised bed garden, figuring out the design for that. And then we generally try to build out from there with berries, which is a huge component of what we do in a small space. So many people can't really grow nut trees and larger fruit trees, but what we can help people do is set up blackberries, raspberries, strawberries are the main ones. And, a lot of times with good plant selection there, folks can be harvesting fruits, all from the beginning of the summer into the fall. So I don't know if that answers your question there, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Definitely. No, thank you. I want to double click on the berries, because both Mike and I love talking about plants and sourcing plants and different cultivars and just some of our favorite things to work with. So are there any particular species or cultivars of berries that you'd say are your favorite to work into your designs, or maybe even just personally to grow and eat?
Well, I'm a huge gumi fan personally. And in my experience, gumi is maybe the most indestructible fruiting plant I've grown. And it's so fast growing. It has never had any pest or disease issues. So for a lot of those reasons, it fits a lot of our choices, because a lot of what we're working with as edible landscapers is like plants that aren't going to look crappy. And so I love gumi for that reason. I've been really into this Tillamook variety. There is a lady named Lucille Whitman, and she has this nursery called Whitman Farms, and she had her own selection of gumi that I believe now she sold it to One Green World, and they released it last year, I think. And they call it Tillamook, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that's a county in Oregon, I believe. I love growing that one, although it's not super loved by all. I don't know if have you had gumi before?
Yeah, and I've run into some of that resistance myself. And yeah, I love gumi. It's a stunning plant. It's that sort of coppery speckled bark and the leaves. Yeah, I think it looks great. And the fruit tastes really nice as well. But yeah, I have run into that where I guess, there's people who might be more natives only type of mentality who say that we shouldn't be planting things that are both exotic and that will spread aggressively, in their words. I haven't necessarily noticed, in my experience, gumi, it propagates fairly readily by layering and from cuttings, but I haven't noticed it like spreading around aggressively.
It's in the same family as autumn olive. Like people don't like autumn olive, and because gumi is such a close relative, I feel like people see it and they're just like, oh, that's that thing that like the government tells us not to plant, right? Which is so it's so ridiculous, because like not so many years ago, autumn olive was something that people were being told to plant and to stabilize soil. I'm also interested, Matt, aside from the berries, I saw a while ago on your Instagram or maybe somewhere else on Facebook that you do a bit of fig plantings and cold hardy figs. You're in a similar climate zone to where I'm in, like zone 6B area. So If you could talk about that to any degree, or just sort of, how you integrate that into your design processes, I'd be very interested to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny because I kind of consider fig almost like a berry bush in our context. It's certainly not, it's not like a fruit tree, and it fits very well into compact spaces. So in our climate, similar to yours, we really seek to find that south-facing hot microclimate and grow figs as much as possible. Similar to the gumi, they're also kind of deer resistant, which is another reason I love gumi, is nothing eats it. And fig is similar. So we basically are planting mostly Chicago hardy. I have trialed quite a number of varieties, and that still does seem to hold up as the earliest fruiting. And I say that because I don't think it's necessarily hardier than a lot of other varieties. So many other figs will come back from the ground in a really cold winter even. But the question is, will they actually ripen fruit in time? And Chicago hardy seems to put on so much growth in the early summer that it actually can make figs. I have had quite a bit of success with Olympian as well. I think it's Olympian or Olympia.
Olympian hardy or something.
Yep.
Hardy Olympian, something like that.
And that one's been really nice too.
Have you tried Marseille's Black, that variety?
I have not.
Okay. I'll send you some cuttings. That's one. I mean, I'm younger than you are to the experimentation with figs, but I've heard that it ripens a week before Chicago hardy and is just as hardy as it.
Oh, fantastic.
So that's one I'm very excited about. And yeah, I have some cuttings that I can send you. So
yeah, I appreciate you guys bringing that up. The hardy figs. I think a lot of people, myself included, sometimes I forget that there's some good quality hardy fig varieties out there. Not many, but there are some. And it's such a easy to grow plant, and fresh figs are so delicious. And like you said, you can work it into the landscape in lots of different ways. It's, it can fit in small spaces, as long as you're finding, a good microclimate for it, which usually you can make room for something like fig, I think.
I was going to say, it's just so perfect for the urban, like heat island environment. That's something that I wanted to touch base with you about is like, you're doing a lot of, personally, I haven't been to St. Louis. You and Ben are both out in Missouri, and I personally have never been, but something about doing regenerative foodscaping or permaculture, whatever you want to call it, in an urban environment is you definitely get to take advantage of microclimates and take advantage of south-facing walls, and just, being in the city where there's areas of pavement or brick walls or whatever, you can kind of push the boundaries a little bit. So, is that something that you kind of consider or take advantage of?
Absolutely. And sometimes it's been a failure in certain senses. I tried the pomegranate thing for many years, and I could never really get the pomegranates to ripen up. Sometimes it looks like even a different scenario, like lots of pavement creating what we would call like an island planting. So areas that lend themselves to spreading plants like bamboo, or one of my absolute favorites, the native passion fruit. And so that's another benefit sometimes of the urban environment, is just not necessarily having those confined spaces where things can't even spread.
Well, I definitely don't want to gloss over the native passion flower that you said is your favorite plant, because it's definitely one of mine as well. So can you tell me what you like about passion flower or maypop?
Yeah, well, the better question is what's not to like about it. It's this tropical, beautiful, fast-growing herbaceous vine that is native and has, some of the most beautiful medicinal flowers. I loved this plant to death. And then I found out that the terminal leaves are incredibly delicious. And then I just became over the moon for this plant. So I was actually on a tour of edible landscaping nursery in Virginia, and they mentioned on this tour that the leaves were edible, and they're so good. I don't know if you guys have eaten them, but they're like grade A salad greens.
Have you ever just tried eating a flower, like just right off the vine?
I don't think I have.
They're even better than the leaves, which is like incredible.
Wow.
I convinced, like getting your parents or family members to eat something that is a little like, in their eyes, like, oh, like, what is this thing you're feeding me? It's kind of hard, but especially when the flowers have finished their bloom and they're starting to like curl up and go into, and they're sort of like bunched up. That's like the perfect time to just put one and munch it. I was amazed. It has I don't even know if I can compare it to something. It has a really fresh flavor that is sort of reminiscent of just like, I don't even know, like almost like cucumbery maybe, or just something that you would never expect from eating a flower. I'm not even sure if that's really the best way to describe it. You know, it's not like borage, which really tastes like cucumbers. It just has this sort of like vegetal, you know, it has a distinct flavor, somewhere between like a savory vegetable kind of taste, but also like sort of citrusy, maybe something in between. Really, I don't know, just something perfect to add to a salad. I was pretty blown away. We could talk about Maypops forever in this episode. Let's talk about some of the projects that you've done. I was, you know, we were in contact about a year ago when I posted something to one of the Facebook groups. I think Chris Homanic's group, Plant Breeding for Permaculture. But then when you contacted me, I was like, oh, I recognize you. I recognize your name from some press that came out about the On Olive residential landscape architecture magazine feature, or whatever magazine that was, which I thought was really cool. I'm currently in a degree program for landscape architecture, and something that I'm trying to bring to the table in my department is just like foraging experiences in public spaces, like food forests in public spaces. Forget about like the community garden model. We need something more than that. We need community orchards. We need food forests. And I was really inspired by the fact that that is sort of like a precedent now that other people can build off of and say, hey, this is already a thing. You know, we need more of this. And I'm sure that's not the only thing that you've done. So I don't know if you could just talk sort of about some of the community or public and private property projects that you've done in terms of edible landscapes and that sort of thing. I'm very interested.
Well, we've been fortunate enough to a handful of kind of community-based permaculture-inspired orchards, if you call it, or just food forests, edible forest gardens. The one you're referring to that was part of a development that's happening here in St. Louis called On Olive. And there's a street called Olive. It's basically it was a very cool concept in that the architects, it was actually an architecture competition to design the homes in this little community. Some of the architects who won the competition also kind of came up with this idea around what a forest garden might look like. And so we were lucky enough to collaborate with them on that. And they chose it as an amenity to be part of this community, which was really unique and something that, yeah, as you said, was really exciting because, you know, a lot of times we think about a tennis court or something as an amenity in a community neighborhood setting. And this was them kind of putting on the brochure, you know, as they were recruiting people, like this edible forest garden. So it's smallish, but it's really tidy and aesthetically pleasing. And then we'll be able to be involved to help guide the harvest and the maintenance so that the folks who live in this community can actually be involved. And there's kind of a clubhouse that is part of a communal space that they can use as a space maybe to facilitate some of the events around the food forest. So that is kind of a very new project, and we're still have a lot to discover in terms of what that project holds. But one of the projects we did this spring that's coming to mind is kind of this project we did at a YMCA. They got a grant to do this like sensory garden. So we're actually going to finish that one in this next spring. But it's not so much of a food forest as it is, you know, just walking around this big kind of field and all these different components that you move through. So you move through some rows of raspberries and bush service berries, and there's a whole bed devoted to lemony tasting things. So it's got trifoliate orange, and it's got sorrel, and it's got different annuals like lemongrass and lemon verbena, and there's perennial lemon thyme and lemon balm. And so there's that. And then you kind of move on to another section, and it's got a row of espalier apples and a row of espalier pears. And you walk through those, and you kind of get to this next area where it's going to be what we call these bus stops. So like a sitting area where there'll be some benches with an arbor over it, and we'll plant grapes over those arbors. So that's an experience where, yeah, another project we're we're halfway through, and it's been really exciting so far. The folks at the Y, they have over 100 community gardeners that are gardening adjacent to this garden that I just described. So there's kind of a lot of eyes on it. It's a lot more fun that way, of course.
That sounds incredible. The way that you were describing the sort of transition between the senses, I don't know. This is the kind of work that I feel like, I don't know, I'm very jealous. Let's just like you're doing the work that I want to do.
Yeah, I'd like to take a walk like that. It sounded great. Matt, I'm kind of curious, and Mike, maybe you can chime in too, because I know you're studying this as well. When you're designing these sorts of systems, whether they be for a community or for a business or even a residence, can you just like kind of briefly show us behind the scenes or just a glimpse of your process of design? Like, where do you start? Do you visit the site and check out what's there? And then when you're actually designing the garden or the orchard, are you doing this by hand? And how does the whole process go? I mean, I'm sure it's complex, but just kind of briefly, I'm just really curious.
Well, I will say it's constantly evolving. As we get more and more experience, some of these things that kind of were a very long next step process have kind of become internalized, and it becomes, something that's obviously just feels much quicker and easier. But I think a lot of my process is really, it sounds like just incredibly simple, but, thinking about sun and, utilizing taller things in the northern part of the landscape and thinking about view, that's such a huge thing with our clients, is like when we have a common theme of, a back door and the kitchen is by the back door, and wanting to think about where that patio is likely located, what is it going to feel like to step out into that yard? Do we want it to feel, really big, or do we want it to feel kind of like enclosed and secret garden-like, and then you can emerge from a space, and these are questions we ask clients during consultations. We think a lot about water. A lot of times I'm walking around at the beginning of a consultation, kind of looking at downspouts and seeing, climbing fences and seeing where does this neighbor's downspout come out? Are you getting all this water into your yard, or is that, going through this channel and actually coming to the street? I think a lot of those are some of the things I'm thinking about initially. I'm also looking at things like, do they have an irrigation system? That's a big thing with our suburban clients, is thinking about just, their existing irrigation system. How are we going to work around that? Are trees just going to get blasted with sprinklers? Thinking about things like other utilities, gas lines and water lines. And those are kind of a lot of the things I'm taking stock of when I'm just gathering information.
So it almost sounds like, you're coming at it from an experiential point of view. It's like, how do I want my design to be experienced by the people who are going to be living, with it every single day, and maybe trying to marry their goals and, what they want out of the garden or out of the space, and then what the site can actually, the capacity of the site, whether that's, what the situation with the neighbors and the water flows, or if that's just the amount of light that they have available. And in some cases they might say, well, we want, a bunch of fruit trees in the backyard and peach trees, and then there's nothing but full shade in the backyard from like large overstory trees from the neighbors. It's like, okay, well, maybe there's something else we can do, that can give you fruit that maybe in a different part of the yard than they would have otherwise thought. So I'm sure there's a delicate dance of working with clients and trying to help them meet their needs and their goals with what's realistic for the site.
Yeah, I think you summed that up really well, to be honest. It's exactly how it feels on this end.
Do you have any standouts in sort of your design, like aesthetics, like things like plants that really kind of check all those boxes of filling, the nutritional aspect, edible, functional, but also aesthetically pleasing? Something that I've been kind of really into lately is Amalakir, or, Juneberry, serviceberry. But there's also, several other kind of standouts that I have sort of in the back of my head. I'm just wondering if there's any that are sort of, you mentioned Gumi as a go-to. I'm just kind of interested in what your go-tos are for clients who are really looking for the aesthetically pleasing, year-round plant that also sort of meets the criteria that we're really interested in.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll share some of these, and I'd love to hear some of yours as well. So yeah, we try to plant I feel like there's like a slogan. I want to start a movement called the service berry in every yard, because we are huge service berry fans, and we plant them in every gig we can. Not only are they're beautiful and the fruit's amazing, but we can get them through the nursery trade as big plants, and clients really like that, and we feel good about being able to plant a bigger plant. So Juneberry serviceberry is a huge one for us. We plant a lot of autumn brilliance, which is the most commonly available one, but we also will plant a lot of bush serviceberries. We can get a regent, which is one of those alnifolia varieties that we have we can get a nice size plant of. And generally, we plant a lot of pie cherries, Prunus cerasus, and they're just, like varieties like North Star and Meteor stay really nice and tidy. And a lot of times, the fruit is just absolutely beautiful and oftentimes like really high quality, not bothered by much pest and disease. So we kind of move, we tell clients, we try to move them throughout the year as much as possible with different plants, depending on how much space they have. So it might start with a serviceberry and then go into a pie cherry. Then we just love blackberries and raspberries. In terms of easy to grow, tough plants that are easy to protect if you need to as well. A lot of obviously different critters and things are common issues with fruits. So things like blackberries and raspberries and other berries are much easier to protect if need be. We're also getting more and more excited about black raspberries. And I'd be curious to know what you guys know about this, but it seems to me that black raspberry is a true native raspberry. And it certainly seems like it is here, and just seems exciting to plant a native fruit that is so high quality.
Yeah, black raspberries are incredibly flavorful. That was one of the first wild berries that I think I remember foraging. For people who haven't tasted them before, they don't taste anything. I don't think they taste like regular red raspberries. I don't think they taste like blackberries. They have their own special volatile, chemicals or volatile compounds in them that make them very delicious. And honestly, I think the sort of artificial blue raspberry flavor that we had as kids and various candies, or at least I did, I think is probably modeled off of the black raspberry flavor. It's kind of got this like very bright, vibrant flavor. So I love it in the landscape. It's native, easy to propagate. It's a little bit thorny. I can't really think if there's a thornless black raspberry cultivar out there. It'd be great if there was.
There aren't thornless varieties, but there are improved varieties. There's a few of them that you can get pretty regularly. I planted some. I grew up with black raspberries in my grandfather's landscape, and so I acquired some from a local garden center. And the only problem with acquiring the cultivars is that they are susceptible to the diseases that normal wild black raspberries have. So the only thing I've encountered is planting the cultivars from nurseries. The plants will like die back or suffer all these different issues that the wild ones only a half a mile away don't suffer from. And where I transplanted some just wild ones into my landscape, and they're doing amazing, whereas the ones I bought from wherever are basically struggling and not doing so great.
That's good to know. Yeah, I know there's Jewel black raspberry out there, I'm sure there's a handful of others. But yeah, sounds like if you already have wild black raspberries, then might as well just enjoy what you have and don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Matt, that was a nice summary of plants that can be both functional and also beautiful. I'm not very familiar with pie cherries, but yeah, I would love to check one out someday and try that fruit. I think for me, I actually think blueberries are quite ornamental. I'm sure you guys have, but maybe not everyone has like looked at blueberry plants up close, especially in the spring. They have like this, the leaves and the new shoots have this sort of like lavender, pinkish, purple like bloom to them. And then of course you have the white flowers, which are small, but also beautiful. And then you get some vibrant reds and yellows in the fall. Plus, I just like looking at them because I love blueberries. So I know that they're going to make some great fruit. So that's my vote for one of the best ornamentals for me.
My only thing with that is that the soil has to be so right, you know, like there's one cultivar, I forget which one it's called. It might be Reka. I'm pretty sure it is Reka, spelled Reka, and it's a new cultivar, and it's just less finicky about the acidity of soil. Like most blueberries need a really acidic soil, but this one is less picky about it, which is an awesome, like, Matt, if you're not using this one yet, like Google it and start planting it everywhere, because I planted it in like the worst soil ever and it's doing great. Whereas every other blueberry I planted is not doing so hot. For me though, in regards to your question about, you know, what plants kind of check all those boxes, I'm also a huge serviceberry fan. I'm surprised that you mentioned autumn brilliance, because I think is that grandifolia? Is that Amelanchier grandifolia? It grows pretty big.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they're different sizes, but yeah, it can get, 15 feet tall.
Gotcha. The way that I think about serviceberry is something that is going to hopefully be one of the cultivars, or like Amelanchier onifolia, that sort of fits into the landscape the same way like a blueberry. And I have trouble sort of imagining that autumn brilliance in my landscape, maybe just because of the lack of spatial stuff. But some of the cultivars like Smoky, or I have Northline, very, very small Northline. I don't know, they just taste so good. I'm amazed by how overlooked the serviceberry has been in our culture in America. Also, like Aronia, I feel like is entirely overlooked. Same thing with elderberry. And most recently, on campus where I go to school, I stumbled upon a medlar, and it was in December. The fruits are ripening on the tree. All the trees are barren. Except for the evergreens, and this is a deciduous tree that's still holding fruit and like looks pretty ornamental from a distance. It kind of from a distance I was thinking, like, did people put Christmas ornaments on this deciduous tree? And as I got up closer, it was the freaking medlars. It was like the actual fruits. And I don't know, medlar has this long history of being hated on all throughout history. People are like, oh, what kind of fruit would you eat that like it has to be rotten for you to eat it? But it tastes delicious. It tastes like I don't even know, like a applesauce texture with like a brown sugar cinnamon flavor. Like I feel like, and it grows in the shade, and it doesn't get, I feel like these are the woody plants that we need to be propagating and planting everywhere. So the fact that you said I want to put a serviceberry in every job, like, that's awesome. More power to you.
Yeah, we definitely think about serviceberries much more like a tree in that respect when we plant those autumn brilliances. But I would say I'm so bummed because I have had 2 medlars planted at my place, and both of them get this terrible rust that really is all over the leaves. They've kind of looked like crap, and I've read and heard about so many exciting things like that. But here at my site, at least those medlars have not done well.
And how does it work with there's like a bledding process, right? Where you're letting them ripen on the tree, or I've also heard people can ripen them off the tree, like underground or something. Like, how does
it depends.
How do you ripen the fruits?
So often they'll ripen on the tree, but they won't always. I think it really might depend on cultivar or variety too. But basically, the bledding is that you pick them all and you put them into a box and put them in a cool, dry place with like typically some hay or something similar to sort of layer in between. And you would let them ripen in that situation and then start eating them in like March or in February, which is the reason why they were so popular as like a medieval fruit. In medieval times, they were super popular, and there's all these paintings of people eating medlar. And then in modern times, people just don't care about it as much. But but that being said, like, you can just eat them right off the tree in December. It's just that you might not be eating all of them ripe off the tree. There'll be ones that are completely hard, and then there'll be ones that are soft and squishy and literally like, it feels like a fig. And when you pop it in your mouth, it's like almost like the experience of eating a fig, in terms of consistency maybe, but instead of like that big sweetness, it just has more of like a applesaucey sort of texture with that brown sugar cinnamon vibe. I don't know.
I need to try it. You make it sound pretty nice.
Is there anything else that you'd like to sort of to cover? Anything you'd like to ask us, or, you know?
Well, since we're talking about, just quickly round out some of the plants that we plant really often, just because for folks listening, it could be really helpful. I'm sure people are aware of pawpaws, but we plant tons of pawpaws, and they really make a great edible landscape plant because they're so ornamental. And we also plant quite a lot of hybrid persimmons. We've had great luck with Nikita's Gift here. It's been such a beautiful tree. And it's been much more ornamental and small as a persimmon. And we plant a lot of Asian pears, I would also mention, because so many of the fire blight resistant Asian pears have just done super well for us.
Yeah, the hybrid persimmon, the Nikita's Gift in particular, Mike and I were just talking about that the other day. I haven't tried it, that one in particular, before, but from what I hear, I mean, it's delicious and very cold hardy. And even people who have like pretty extensive persimmon collections, both hybrids and Americans and even khaki, they say that particular one is one of their favorites. So it's really nice to know that it can grow somewhere like St. Louis, or I didn't actually even think we could grow it in central Missouri.
I was lucky enough to try one only last month, maybe. And oh man, it was amazing. It was like everything that you want from both worlds, and it's so cool that it can grow as far north as even Massachusetts. There's one growing in the permaculture gardens at UMass where I go to school, and I think it died back one year, but other than that, it's doing great. It produced over probably 100, maybe more like 50 to 75 persimmons this year, and they were delicious. So yeah, it's really cool that you're integrating that into your landscapes.
One other thing I was wondering, Matt, is, as far as like the culture of people who want foodscaping, who want to be growing more food, like who do you find are your clients and the people who are wanting this? Are this people who have never, gardened before and they want to experience what it's like to grow their own food? Do you see a culture shift happening, at least in your region, in local food, or people who want to be self-sufficient? I was just wondering if you could speak on maybe like the cultural aspect of foodscaping in your experience.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so many people we have worked with are a very similar demographic in their 30s and mid 30s to maybe mid 40s, young kids. And all of them, it's like we have the same design. We send everybody a questionnaire, and they have to respond like what their vision is. And everybody says like, I want my kids to grow up eating out of the garden. Like that's the thing they want more than anything. And I think that they know that, they're spending all this time on their phones and their computers, and they're spending a fortune going to Whole Foods, buying organic blueberries, and they're connecting the dots. Like we need to get outside. We need to, save on our food bill and hopefully get the kids, like get their hands dirty. It's funny because our biggest demographic is not like we have a majority of our clients that are doctors, but we have so many doctors, and it's really encouraging. And like we got a few early, and then it just like spread like wildfire, and the doctors tell other doctors. So that's been a really interesting development and a really exciting one, because food is medicine, and we want them preaching the gospel of growing your own food for sure, because it's so much more powerful when doctors are making that case, I think.
Yeah, if my doctor told me he was growing his own food and cared about getting the freshest nutrients possible, I think I would give him a lot more credit, a lot more trust. No, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
The nutritional aspect of what you're doing is just so important, in terms of providing nutrition to people in general, like at the YMCA planting that you're talking about. People undervalue how much these plants really mean to, like, even landscapes that are exceptionally lacking nutrition, like food swamps and food deserts. I don't know what St. Louis is really like, but so many people in the United States don't have access to healthy food on the regular, or they could be going to like their local gas station to purchase dinner. And in that gas station, you have processed foods, and you might be walking by all these plants that are highly nutritional that they just don't really fully understand that they're highly nutritional. So it seems like what you're doing is you're building these landscapes that people have access to this nutrition, and you're also providing the educational side of things. And so I don't know, just kudos to you. Like really the work you're doing is amazing.
Thanks so much. Very kind of you.
Yeah, Matt, this might be a good opportunity. People want to learn more about your work and get connected with what you're doing. Where's a good place to find you?
So we're at customfoodscaping.com, and we have, we're on social media with Instagram and Facebook. The one site that I would direct folks to with more emphasis is the foodscaper.com. And this is a different business that we started to try to kind of grow this movement. We realized after we were doing this foodscaping thing for a few years that there's actually no network and organization around people who grow food for other people for a living in the way that we do. There's no conference, there's no trade association, no magazine, no nothing. So we started the Foodscaper, and then this winter, I'm really pumped. We got all these amazing Foodscapers together, and they're doing presentations and doing this Foodscaper Summit that we're doing in January. They're going to be sharing kind of all their wisdom and through different formats.
That sounds like a wonderful resource. I have a friend in Nashville who does Foodscaping. I'll have to, if he hasn't already been involved, I should let him in on that.
Is it Nashville Foodscapes?
It is. It's Jeremy.
Oh yeah, Jeremy has been a huge inspiration for me, and he's presenting at that summit.
Oh great. Yeah, no, I kind of had a feeling. I was thinking, okay, if they don't know each other, they probably should. I think they would get along great.
Is Dave Scandura also presenting at this Edible Landscapes of Cape Cod? Is that also a thing, or am I making this up?
He is as well. Yeah,
Gotcha.
He's going to present on perennial vegetables, and he's a wealth of knowledge on that.
It's just funny that, how much of us already know each other. We got to have some sort of retreat, like a camp out where we all meet each other in person instead of having these Zoom get-togethers,
Yeah.
I'm all for it. Yeah, we really want that. One day we hope we can do that with the Foodscaper Summit and actually bring people together. And yeah, because there's so many of us who are just so like-minded in this respect, and it feels like we're kind of, the new generation's iteration of what it looks like to be really excited about plants and growing food. It's not necessarily all about farming. So I think we have a lot of a new conversation to have. And yeah, I would love to meet you all in person.
Hear, hear. I'll be there.
Yeah, me too.
Well, is there anything else, Mike, or should we wrap this up?
Yeah, Matt, I don't know. It's been amazing to have you. I feel like I still have so many questions. Maybe we'll do a second round interview at some point. I'm jealous of everything that you're doing. Honestly, so often I think about the ways that designers of food forest systems or forest gardens in whatever context can really bring to the table for communities and for the general public. Just nutrition and access to amazing nutritional food, and also just like mental health experiences too. Like something we didn't necessarily talk about today is the way that having a garden in your landscape improves your mental health. And all these doctors that you're working with and all these clients, they're not just providing food for their families, or you're not just providing food for communities, you're also just improving their mental health with green space. And I don't know, my hat's off to you.
And Matt, I'm out here in Columbia, but next time I'm in St. Louis, I'll give you a shout. I'd love to see some of the stuff you're working on. Yeah,
please do. We're only a few hours away here, so feel free to give me a holler when you're in town.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on, and hope to speak with you again soon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for doing this podcast. I've learned a ton and really appreciate you keeping the conversation like this.
Appreciate you. All right, take care. Have a good night.
Well, if you stuck with us this long, podcast listeners, I guess I should probably fill you in on some of the deets that we covered on today's episode. If you're interested on checking out the Foodscaper Summit, it's January 20th and the 21st of 2022. You can find out more information about it at thefoodscaper.com/summit. If you're interested in following us on social media, you can find us on Instagram at Forest Garden Podcast, and you're always welcome to shoot us an email at theforestgardenpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for sticking with us, and see you next time, everyone.